So much of the time in politics, it seems like people are just talking past one another. Each side seems just as passionate, just as articulate, and just as committed to the truth as the other side. And yet, there seems to be so little understanding. Perhaps we're not just dealing with different points of view, we're dealing with different concepts of truth itself. We can't agree on what's true because we don't agree on what truth is. In this episode, we're going to delve into that question, plus present our PoC Top-3, and as always, a little news you can't use. That's what's coming up on the Physics of Civics. You know, Jay, there are a lot of ways that people slice and dice history and separate it into various periods. When it comes to modes of thinking and truth-seeking, however, history can be divided into three main eras: the pre-modern era, the modern era, and the postmodern era. Roughly speaking, the pre-modern era begins at the dawn of recorded history and goes to the early medieval period, or thereabout. The modern era begins sometime after the fall of the Roman Empire and continues to the early 20th century. And the postmodern era starts around the first half of the 20th century and continues more or less to this day. These are broad generalizations, of course, and these eras certainly do overlap, but each of these three has distinctive characteristics that give rise to certain tendencies in terms of truth-seeking and thought. And we can explore these tendencies and understand them.
So I guess the way we look at truth has changed.
Right.
When you talk about the pre-modern era, you're basically talking about the ancient world, I assume.
That's right. In the pre-modern era, most societies were primarily agrarian and or seafaring. Many were still rather nomadic as well. The more advanced civilizations, they had basic knowledge, writing, math, engineering, commerce, etc. But the vast majority of people in pre-modern societies were illiterate and uneducated, mostly making their living through some combination of farming and fishing, with a certain amount of hunting and gathering and even plundering going on as well.
Plundering?
Well, you know, Vikings and,
Sure, absolutely.
Wars and conquests. And all of these activities depended to some extent on favorable natural conditions, the weather, sea currents, the seasons, etc. And these things affected pretty much every aspect of life. And for that reason, pre-modern societies also tended to be polytheistic. You think of the ancient Egyptians, the Indians, the Babylonians. Of course, the Jews were monotheistic, but in the pre-modern era, they were something of an anomaly. But, you know, the Greeks,
they all
the Romans
worship multiple gods. And
you're right. And each god representing a different aspect of life in the world.
Cheaper than inflation, funnier than Congress, and more informative than the news. The Physics of Civics. Follow, share, like, and comment now. This episode of the Physics of Civics is brought to you by Savage Soaps. Shop SavageSoaps.com for luxurious, all-natural soaps and other skin-loving products for men and women. All handcrafted from sustainably sourced plant-based ingredients. Get wet with Savage.
When we read these ancient mythologies, we see that these gods could be quite capricious, even vindictive, often at cross purposes with one another. And because of this, people tended to view their world as a rather mysterious and arbitrary and often chaotic place. So, to make sense of the world around them, pre-modern societies typically turned to mystics of one sort or another, oracles, shamans, soothsayers, priests, prophets, etc. These were a particular class of learned individuals who purportedly had a special connection to the spiritual realm. And through it, they gained divine knowledge and wisdom, which they then imparted to the people. All of this is to say that in the pre-modern era, truth tended to be viewed as something that is revealed.
It's almost like a cultish thing in today's society.
Kinda.
What changed from the pre-modern era to the modern era?
Well, I mean, as we move to the medieval period, the main change that we see is the decline of polytheism and the rise of monotheism. By about, the 8th century AD or so, most people in Europe and the Middle East were either Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. Now, they viewed the world not as chaotic, but as highly ordered, with both moral and natural laws representing the will of the one true God, whoever their one true God was. Now, this was a radical change because now people saw a world where nature and natural laws could be understood by people through observation, experimentation, analysis, etc.
Right.
In fact, it was often considered the duty of believers to study the world as a way of understanding God's ways.
Kind of a similarity between all these is that they all were based on some kind of a sacred text or a book, right?
That's right. Well, the three great monotheistic religions were, they were all based on sacred writings. Prophet Muhammad referred to Jews and Christians and Muslims as peoples of the book. And that's important because that's a great point, because it meant that more and more people were learning how to read. Write, do math, do science, etc. And this is what brought about the rise of education and scientific inquiry, all of these things together. In other words, as we move from the pre-modern era to the modern era, truth was no longer something that was simply revealed. Rather, truth is something to be discovered. And in fact, this modernist thinking is what produced the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and later on, the Industrial Revolution, the Information Age, generally the age of science and reason, all, ironically, springing directly from the age of faith.
Right.
Now, if you can see the irony in all this, tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
So what happened to the age of faith? I mean, obviously, that's not where the world is now. What changed that, or how did that come about?
Well, that's true. I mean, even here in the 21st century, there are an estimated, 2.4 billion Christians in the world? Another 1.8 billion Muslims, hundreds of millions of Buddhists, Hindus, tens of millions of Jews. I mean, altogether, that accounts for, between 75 and 80% of the world's population right there.
Are religious in one way. Yeah, okay.
Right, depending on whose statistics you believe. So, religious affiliation hasn't exactly declined, but by the late 19th century, there's no doubt that religious faith had clearly begun to lose a lot of its influence, at least, relative to what it had been. And people were becoming more educated on average, and religions were becoming more numerous, more sectarian, more fractured, and frankly, weirder. I mean, some of these, let's face it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, new philosophies like existentialism, nihilism, scientific materialism, and of course, Marxism were all competing for popular acceptance. And by, the early 20th century, what do we see? We see the rise of totalitarianism with all the wars and horrors that they brought, so that by the end of the Second World War, you had people quite understandably beginning to wonder, where is God? I mean, we look at the Holocaust, we look at, all of these disasters. And at the same time that religious faith was being challenged, so too were the suppositions of an ordered universe. It was kind of, the discoveries like, general relativity, black holes, the Big Bang Theory, they turned a lot of long-held scientific beliefs on their heads.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And moreover, it seemed to replace faith as a way to explain the universe without the need for God. Not only that, but there was certain insidious things like brainwashing, mind-altering drugs, not to mention the omnipresent mass media and the ability, through things like cinematic special effects and computer animation to create new and realistic fantasy
worlds. Yeah.
We've played these fantasy. I have, the Star Wars games, World of Warcraft, that kind of stuff. All of this stuff kind of chipped away at people's perception of reality. So truth and falsehood kind of became harder to decipher and increasingly subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, eventually, the very concept of objective truth that had characterized the modern era began to give way to this new thing called postmodernism, in which truth is no longer something to be discovered or revealed. Rather, truth is basically invented. Truth is entirely in the mind of the individual.
Yeah.
My truth could be different from your truth, which may be completely different from another person's truth, and yet they're all considered as equally valid.
It's crazy.
That's the idea. Now, if you agree with this idea, type agree in the comments. We'd like to see who holds to this postmodernist view.
Permission to illustrate with examples.
Permission granted.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about this and kind of putting it into current context.
Sure.
Climate change. Now, we can look at this in terms of what a Democratic-leaning person and a Republican-leaning or liberal and conservative, their truth is very different on this subject, right?
Well, that's a great example. Yeah, it really is.
If you listen to a more liberal or Democratic truth on this subject of climate change, you hear that it's caused primarily by humans and that it's our fault for, industrialization and burning fossil fuels and whatever. And that there's a consensus among scientists that's overwhelming that government doesn't take action now, we're all going to die, basically. And on the other side of the aisle, their truth is, hey, climate change is real. We've had climate change on this earth for hundreds of millions, possibly billions of years.
Right.
But it's still argued by knowledgeable scientists as to whether or how much impact humans have on...
Yeah, are we facing a global climate crisis?
And do we need to invest hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars from our economy into saving the world?
And change the way we do everything.
So, that's an example of what you're talking about here, where there are two separate truths there. And an individual kind of decides which truth they align with, right?
Right. That gets hard to distinguish from opinion at some point.
If everyone is inventing, I will say, their own truth, where does that leave our society? Is there truth?
And this is why we're discussing this today, because it's a problem. Why? Well, for one thing, this postmodernist notion of moral and intellectual relativism, well, one thing it's done, it's played right into the hands of the worst dictators of the last century.
Absolutely.
Once society's accepted that truth can be whatever one believes it to be, then it was inevitable that truth would end up being whatever those in power proclaimed it to be.
That's right. And we've seen it over and over and over.
And we see it. Relativism became kind of a cudgel wielded, and really by one totalitarian regime after another, to crush dissent and control populations. This is precisely the danger that George Orwell warned about in his novel 1984. The moment we abandon the concept of objective truth, we elevate falsehood to an equal status with the truth. After all, if anything can be true, how do we distinguish truth from falsehood? More importantly, once the powers that be appropriate for themselves the sole authority to make such distinctions, truth becomes the exclusive domain of the powerful elites to be imposed upon the weak masses. Not through faith, not through reason or persuasion, but by brute force. You will believe what we tell you to believe, and you will act accordingly, or there will be consequences. And that's the danger.
Aren't we seeing that today, though, in some respects in the political world, in the political environment?
I think we are. Folks, tell us what you think. If this rings true to you, type Orwell was right in the comments. Or type whatever you want.
This is not exactly a new thing, though, is it?
What, this whole concept of...
It's a recent development of...
You'll believe what we tell you to believe?
What we tell you. It's been around for...
Oh, no, yeah. Sadly, it has been around since time immemorial.
Right.
There's no denying, for example, that this kind of what you might call tyranny of the mind is not so different from what historically occurred all too often under the rule of certain fanatical Christian and even fundamentalist Muslim theocracies, regimes that abused religious doctrine for their own power. It's an old story. But even as this form of tyranny by religious elites was being denounced, it was also simultaneously being adopted by the very forces that were denouncing it. Over the last century, this has reached global proportions, and it must be rejected from whatever source it comes from.
So when you say we need to reject postmodernism, what does that mean? How do you go about?
First of all, there are very good logical reasons to reject postmodernism. First and foremost is the fact that it is inherently self-contradictory.
Mm-hmm. As you just said. You just pointed out.
To say that everything is relative and nothing is absolute is like saying everything I say is a lie.
Right.
If it's true, it's false. So now, and besides that, we know for certain types of people, in certain walks of life, and I'm talking about academics, artists, movie producers, etc., they're able to fashion for themselves any kind of truth they want.
Yeah, whatever they want.
And this is how Orwell explains it. They can create a world where 2 + 2 does not equal 4 if they want to.
It's a fantasy world.
But for those who have to make payroll or pilot an aircraft or build a bridge, for those who have to live in the real world, 2 + 2 had better damn well equal 4.
Right.
Or things are going to break and people are going to die. We can play these existential mind games all we like, but the real world just keeps spinning and it doesn't care how we perceive it. Now, of course, none of this is to say that there are no subjective truths. Of course, there are. In fact, I'd go as far to say most truth is subjective. How we see things depends on where we stand.
Mm-hmm.
And there are obviously plenty of situations where perception is reality. For example, if I think I'm happy, well, then I'm happy. If I believe myself to be a Yankees fan, then I'm a Yankees fan. And, for the record, I'm not.
Good.
Go Nats. But,
And honestly, how much do we really actually know for sure? I mean, that's the point you're kind of making. I mean, how much of what we know is really truth or what we think is truth?
Well, I mean, surprisingly not that much. And that's a great point. When we stop to consider it, most of what we claim to know is really information about which we cannot possibly have any firsthand experiential knowledge. Yet, we count such information as knowledge because we trust the source. For example, I believe in a thing called oxygen. Why? Can't see oxygen. I can't taste it or smell it or hear it or touch it. If my life depended on it, I couldn't prove to you that oxygen exists.
Right.
And yet, I have no doubt that it does.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I was taught, and I believe the people who taught it to me. And what's more, that is a perfectly reasonable and rational thing to do. In that sense, there are things that are objectively true. We're not here to tell you what they are, just that they exist. Mm-hmm. And that's what's important. I think about the Declaration of Independence, and the most important part of that is the part that begins with, we hold these truths to be self-evident. What does that mean? That means these things don't require any proof or verification. One has only to state them to affirm them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fortunately, we Americans still live in a mostly free society.
Subjective.
Thankfully. But we're still having to deal with a lot of, ideological and cultural, and I'm just going to call them absurdities, that certain powers have demanded that we accept. And there's no doubt that resistance to such demands has been met with fierce consequences. And we've seen this, the denial of rights, even violence.
Yep.
Perhaps the tide has turned on all that, perhaps not.
Let's hope.
I'm reminded of what Ronald Reagan said. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And that's important to keep in mind.
Amen.
And, as a free people, I believe we need to hold fast to certain objective truths. We need to maintain a fundamental baseline of self-evident truth and to acknowledge that some things are true no matter who's perceiving them. And that nonsense is still nonsense, even when brilliant scientists utter it. I fear that if we lose that capacity for critical thinking, we risk surrendering our intellectual freedom to those who would use their power to control our thoughts and our speech and our lives. And once our intellectual freedom disappears, pretty much all the other freedoms goes with it. We talk about power in another episode, how power is gained and wielded and lost, and it's a fascinating discussion. So don't forget to hit subscribe and be sure you don't miss it. In the meantime, give us your thoughts on these questions and any others in the comments.
So, Phil, we've got our PoC Top 3 coming up here. This is where Phil and I give our top 3 on a subject. These are our personal top 3s.
And we invite you to put your own top 3s or top 1 or top 10, we don't care how many, in the comments.
This is a tough one. This is our top 3 sitcoms. That's of all time throughout history. So,
okay.
Been a lot. I'll be honest with you, dude. I haven't watched sitcoms in years. I just don't. I don't feel like they're as good as they were in the last 20 years. They just don't seem to be as good as they used to be.
Well, I think that's also a format that's kind of not as conducive to streaming and
that's true.
The kind of media that we're used to consuming nowadays. But there are still some, and there's some recent ones. Shall I start?
Yes, sir. Give me your 3.
All right. I'm going to go number 3. I'm going to go with Seinfeld. It's been around a while. I've seen them all a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I know the jokes. I know what's coming. They still make me laugh,
And you know why? It's the characters.
The characters are great. These people understand timing. And the emotions of comedy. They're great. And the episode, do you remember the episode with Mr. Bookman? The investigator from the public library?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, God, that scene is hilarious.
Yeah.
Let me set you straight, funny boy.
Yeah, I think it was this absurd style of comedy that really, I don't know if anybody had ever done it that way before.
No, not really.
Maybe on on Saturday Night Live or some kind of a variety type thing. But in a weekly sitcom, it was just so absurd that everybody could laugh at it. That's a good one. I've got that on my list. I hate to say it, but go ahead. What's your number 2?
Number 2 is very much in that same vein in terms of I've seen them all a billion times and they still make me laugh. The Big Bang Theory.
Oh, okay. I never really...
It's about a bunch of really, really smart nerds and the really stupid things they say and do on a regular basis. And they're just, the characters are great. The writing is great. And of course there's Penny,
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want Penny for a girlfriend? I mean, she's great.
I have to dig into that one. I've never seen that show.
Oh, you've got to see it. That's some of the funniest comedy on TV.
All right.
Number 1 is one that holds a special place for me for a couple of reasons. First of all is, it's just great writing. Such great characters. Same reasons is Cheers.
Oh yeah, great show.
Cheers was one of the main reasons I love Cheers has to do with my older sister Penny, who had a very great career in Hollywood for a lot of years as a television producer. The last job that she had before she became a producer was unit production manager on Cheers.
Right.
Not coincidentally, when I moved out to California and got my day job was as a union extra, the silent background actors, I got a regular gig on Cheers as one of the bar patrons.
Oh, I've seen you on there, brother. I've seen you.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was a live audience show, and I got to meet a lot of the people on that. They were great people, and I really loved them. So my number 1 is definitely Cheers.
You did look a little younger in some of the clips. Every once in a while I'll check, because that was a great show.
It was the 80s, Jay.
We were both out in L.A. in those days playing music, but...
Playing music at night, and I was working in television during the day. Which ones are your favorite sitcoms?
Because I couldn't come up with only 3. So I'm going to start with 2 that are old shows that I loved. And one was MASH.
Oh, yeah.
That was a classic show. It was one of the early sitcoms where in a half hour you could laugh and cry and feel sorry for somebody and laugh at somebody. It kind of incorporated all that into which was a little bit unusual up to that point, I think. A lot of people have tried to do that afterwards.
Had a lot of social consciousness in it.
A lot of social consciousness, and that was important. And another one along those lines that had social consciousness was All in the Family.
All in the Family.
I mean, that was
that
so
show.
ahead of its time. Again, I was young, relatively, when that was on.
Would you stifle yourself?
Yeah. Meathead. I mean, younger folks are not going to have any idea what we're talking about.
They're not going to have any idea what we're talking about.
But that was one of the first shows, I think, that really tackled some of the really challenging social issues.
Political issues of the day. Yeah, Norman Lear was the producer, and he was very big in that.
Yeah, and so it was a well-done show, and it was the same kind of thing. You could laugh and you could cry, mostly laugh. They tackled things like, racism and many different issues.
Yeah.
But my number one is Seinfeld. Now, I know you already mentioned it, but I can't leave it off my list, Phil, because I think it's the funniest show ever on TV. I can watch it over and over. And even though it's 30 years old or 30, whatever it is, 40, 35 years old.
It really is. It's old.
Yeah, it's still funny. And because the characters are so unique, there's 4 basic characters, an ensemble of 4 people, and they're all so different from each other.
Who's your favorite?
Of course, everyone's going to say Kramer, but I like George Costanza.
I love Elaine. Elaine is my favorite.
She's great.
She is funny as hell.
They're all great, and what they all have in common is they're narcissists. They all care completely about how they feel about things, and no one else. Right. Great show. I really loved it. So those are our top 3 for this week. Leave us a comment and let us know what your top 3 or your top 1, or name a show that we missed. All right, my friend, how about some news you can't use?
Well, I know I can't use it.
Well,
but of course, I haven't heard what this one is yet. You're gonna spring this one on me.
It's kind of weird. It's kind of scary, kind of interesting.
All right.
I got this off a website called Dexterdo.com, and I think it's some kind of gaming thing. NASA has responded to growing speculation that mysterious interstellar object 31 Atlas is actually an alien starship preparing to invade Earth. You ready for this?
Yeah.
So apparently there's this object that NASA's been following. They discovered it relatively recently, I think the beginning of this year, and it's flying towards Earth. Some are speculating that it potentially has some characteristics that go beyond what a comet would typically have. Its unusual brightness and rapid rotation rate have fueled conspiracy theories, with some insisting it could be an artificial craft. Unlike typical comets that only reflect light, 31 Atlas appears to glow on its own, sparking theories that it may contain a power source or engine. Yowza! So here's what caught me about this. NASA is being pressed by Representative Anna Paulina Luna and a man named Job, who is an astrophysicist at Harvard. He thinks this may be something other than a comet. Representative Anna Paulina Luna is pushing on NASA to keep an eye on this thing and keep Congress up to speed on what's going on. The massive interstellar object, when it passes the sun on Halloween Eve, so just a month and a half away, they have concerns that it may deploy mini probes towards Earth. So NASA's shutting down this whole thing. They're saying, it's just a comet. This is what NASA says. NASA officials, however, are dismissing the alien invasion talk. The agency has been tracking 31 Atlas with ground and space telescopes since its discovery. It does show hallmarks of a natural comet. It looks like a comet. It does comet things. It very, very strongly resembles it. But just about every other way, it's a comet, but there are some strange things that we can't explain, says Tom Statler, NASA's lead scientific head of small bodies. So,
whenever there are things that you can't explain, the only explanation, the only possible explanation is that it's aliens from another planet.
Boy, we've been hearing a lot of that lately, haven't we?
Well, you people say, do you believe in UFOs? Well, do I believe that there are objects flying that haven't been identified? Sure.
Yeah, of course.
That's what a UFO is. I'm just going to say this much, and I'll try to make it as brief as I can. When I was in college, I had a science elective course. I took astronomy. the last day of the course, after we had finished the test and we had some time in the lecture hall, the teacher opened it up for questions, and inevitably somebody asked about aliens.
Right.
And the professor went on a very detailed explanation of just how far away things are in this galaxy and how far apart they are. And the illustration leaves you thinking, yeah,
no way.
No way. There's the odds are quite literally astronomical. It ain't happening.
That's the takeaway.
It's just, I'll believe it when I see it, put it that way.
Yeah.
When Alf steps off the aircraft and, is looking for something to eat, I'll say, okay, I believe you now.
To play devil's advocate, my friend Phil, if you think about it, these are things beyond our current understanding, of course. What we're talking about, space travel, time travel, or even, just being able to travel the speed of light. You're still looking at, a million years for whatever it is to get to the closest body that could support life from somewhere else. So yeah, I get all that. But at the same time, if you went back as recent as, 500 years ago, and you confronted people that lived in those times and showed them some of the things we're doing now, they would be blown away. So,
well, of course they would.
You never know.
Yes, but we know these things are real.
We do.
The things that we're doing that would blow them away.
Yes,
sure.
But they didn't, and that's my point. If some other humanity had this technology that's way beyond our understanding, it's possible.
Yeah. Why, though? Think about the technology we have, cameras, video footage. Why is every video
blurry
of a UFO blurry and black and white and grainy? Like they all came from 1948.
I guess you're going to tell me you don't believe in Bigfoot then.
I'm not saying that. I'm not dismissing anything. I'm saying show me.
Independence Day, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, Men in Black. Well, folks, that's our show. We hope you learned something, and we hope there's some news that you can use in all of this. Once again, be sure to like, follow, and share. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you miss none of our upcoming episodes. And we will see you here next time on the Physics of Civics.